All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the public portion of the meeting of the Halifax Water Board of Commissioners. So we will start the meeting with item 1A, which is the ratification of the in-camera motions. Could I have a motion to accept, please?
Okay, Commissioner Lovelace, I so move.
Thanks. Thank you. Ted, you seem to be muted.
All right, I thought I was unmuting myself. I second.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a logistics question around diligence before we get started?
Sure.
I'm not sure who can answer it, but is there a way to split this so that I can see the agenda and some of the items I'm looking at the same time? It's awkward. I find I'm flipping back and forth all the time, and I just wondered, is there a way to split this?
So on the top left-hand side of the screen, just underneath the arrow that has home beside it, you should see a little box that has 3 dots and 3 lines.
Yes, I see that.
Click on that, you're going to get a side panel that opens that will allow you to navigate through the various items.
Mm-hmm.
Not an exact duplicate of the agenda, but it's pretty close.
So in order to look at the agenda, the other will have to go away, and so then I flip back to that. And so that's what I was wondering, is there a way to split that open so that I can see both at the same time? But
well, if you have that side panel open, it's effectively the agenda. You can follow along in there. And
okay, it's in the same, yeah. Okay, good, fine. Thank you.
Excellent. So we have a motion to accept the ratification of in-camera motions, which has been moved and duly seconded. Any question? And I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Abstention? Motion carried. Everybody's had a look at the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the regular meeting agenda that anybody wants to note? None. Can I have a motion for acceptance of the order of business, please?
So moved. Commissioner Kent.
Second by Commissioner Cottle.
Yep. Thank you.
I took the hand in the air as you were seconding. Okay. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Contrary minded? Abstentions? Thank you very much. Motion carried. Approval of minutes of the regular meeting held on Thursday, January 28th, 2021. The minutes have been distributed. Can I have a motion for acceptance, please?
Commissioner Rawlings, I make that motion.
Second?
Second.
Commissioner Lovelace.
Thank you. Were there any errors or omissions that anybody noted, or any questions with regards to the minutes, apart from the business arising? Hearing none, we'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Contrary minded? Abstentions? Motion carried. Kathy, any business arising from the minutes that you wish to speak to?
One note, the proposed 21-22 business plan that was approved by the Halifax Water Board was presented to Halifax Council and approved.
Excellent. Thank you. So we'll move to item 4.1, the operating results for the period ending February 28th, 2021. I'm assuming Louis is speaking to this.
Yes, I can.
Floor is yours, my friend.
Okay. So just a quick run through of what our results have been. So these are the results as of February 28th, 2021. The report provides a fair amount of information. I'll try and summarize sort of the assets, the liabilities, and then a bit more about our revenue and our expenditures. So we give very summary information here. So on the current asset side, an increase of about 2.4 million. Cash has increased to just over $58 million, which is about $3 million higher than last year, mostly due to the essentially timing of our capital expenditures. Receivables continue to be in the same relative range, about $2.5 million decrease year over year. Inventory, we did a bulk purchase of meters before prices went up last year, so we continue to use those over the course of the year. So inventory is a little bit higher. On the capital asset side, up about $29 million, mostly related to our expenditures related to capital. So we'll go through those as we go along. Vic, if you can go to the next slide. On the liability side, payables have increased by about $2.9 million. Most of that related to timing of different capital invoices, the timing of our payroll remittances, and some of our significant purchases related to vehicles. One of the areas that I wanted to mention specifically was around debt. So our debt is about $4 million higher than last year. One of the issues we have is in September, the Halifax Water Board approved borrowing for the fall debenture of about $20 million. The Municipal Finance Corporation has encountered delays, and we are yet to receive that money. We're in good financial position, so we don't. It wasn't an urgency for us, but I think it's tied to additional debt that the municipality was looking for this fiscal year, and they needed to go back to, I believe, provincial cabinet to get amendments, etc. So that's caused delays, and we anticipate we'll be receiving that $20 million. Sorry, I'm getting notification that my camera is different. So we anticipate getting that $20 million in April of this year. You can go to the next slide, Jake, please. So our metered sales, so that's our revenue for metered sales is down about 1.1%. On a volumetric side, the consumption part of our sales is down about 1.9. The operating expenditures up about $3.9 million. About 1.3 is related to salaries and benefits. About 2.5 related to depreciation on assets. The financial and other revenue, as Kathy mentioned earlier, we stopped charging interest on overdue accounts for the first 6 months of the year, so that's affected our financial revenue. If you can go to the next slide, Jake. So this slide just summarizes the revenue in a little more detail, so you can see the parts that's consumption, our base charges, stormwater, fire protection, etc. So it just provides a different snapshot of the information. So here's the summary of the revenue and expenditures by service. So water, we have a surplus of about $2 million. Wastewater and stormwater are both losses so far this year of 1.9 and 1.3 respectively. So most of the increases related to salaries and benefits and our depreciation charges. One of the things that we do have for wastewater and stormwater, this is the first year that we've been paying a water dividend or a dividend to HRM related to our payment of lieu of taxes. So we have increased that in both our wastewater and stormwater side. And I think that's the last slide, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Louis. Does anybody have any questions? Ted?
Thank you, Louis. Looking at that, I guess my conclusion is that the impact of COVID on receivables has really been pretty minor. And same thing, revenue, there hasn't been a heck of a lot of a change in revenue. And I was just wondering if you concur.
Yes, that's accurate. That's what we're seeing. Most of the concern that we have around our receivables is the age of the receivables relative as opposed to the actual balance. The balance tends to change with the timing of our billings. So, but the concern is the age. So we continue to see the amount of our receivables over 120 days continue to be higher than we'd like it to be.
Anything else, Ed?
Is that a material amount? What's the rough amount?
It's probably about $1 million or so, but but part of our, I would say, would be the increase. It's staying at about $5 million over the course of the year, but it's what we're seeing is the age is what the concern is.
But is it anything to cause a concern about people's ability to pay? Or is it something that we expect to kind of get the aging to get better over time?
We do anticipate it getting better.
And I should add that we do have some strategies that were in the business plan approved for this year that are going to help with that, hopefully. Yeah. One is our increasing efforts to get customers to sign up to the customer portal. So they would be able to get into their account details, and we'll also be able to send messages to customers. The second thing is we're planning to introduce monthly billing this year, and monthly billing will mean smaller, more frequent bills for customers, so accounts are more top of mind, and it's easy to get caught up or to pay a smaller bill than it is a larger bill that's coming on a quarterly basis. So hopefully the first step with the conversion to monthly billing and the real focus on the portal is we can prevent more accounts from creeping into that 120 days past due category. And meanwhile, Louis has some a new position in this year's budget that you approved for a collection specialist that will help us work on the collection processes and work with the customers who currently are in that 120 days past due category.
Thank you, Kathy.
Councillor Lovelace and then Councillor Cottle.
Thank you. I appreciate that presentation, Louis. I was just wondering if you could speak to the metered sales difference between commercial and residential. I agree. It's pretty minor impact. I was surprised by that, actually. I just wonder, is there much of a difference? Are we seeing between the commercial and residential?
What we were seeing as we've been tracking for the year so far, the residential consumption was up between 3 to 6%, depending on relative to the. So sorry, we saw residential consumption increase between 3 and 5% month over month, and then what we've seen is a fairly significant drop, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, related to the commercial sector. So that's gradually beginning to rebound. But we did see fairly significant differences between the two and the impact of COVID-19 on it.
And some areas and accounts, the issue could be fairly dramatically seen. For instance, the airport, the commercial and industrial area around the airport, and the Burnside Business Park and the Bears Lake Business Park would be 3 areas where when we're looking at what's going on in the water distribution system and looking at also the metered sales data, we could see that there's significant impact.
Thank you.
Councillor Cottle? You're muted, Councillor Cottle.
These different platforms. There we go. Okay. Thank you. That's very interesting about the commercial, the big decrease in commercial, which I guess is expected, but it's nice to have some data there. I was just thinking about the, when we were talking about the portal and, primarily in helping people manage arrears and whatnot. I'm just thinking there's a program right now through the libraries where they're loaning out computers and laptops to people who with internet access, to people who don't have computers, don't have internet access, all of that stuff. And I'm just thinking it'd be really neat if we could kind of connect and have in those laptops portals to services like that like this that people would actually find useful for within the municipality, so that when they get those computers, because I think a big part of it is the people who most need that are the most difficult ones to connect with. So any opportunity to find ways of connecting with them, I think, would be beneficial on both ends. So I'm just going to throw that out there, and I don't know, where that can go. But next time I'm talking to the library folks, I might suggest that and figure out how we can support that from Halifax Water. So more people know about it.
And I do communicate, so one thing I could do is reach out and ask if customer portal information could be displayed in the libraries, particularly in their, I don't know what they're calling them, the computer lab sections, if you will. And I know that the library is doing a lot of community outreach right now in terms of getting their customers online. So I think if we put the information there and make it available, that might be a good idea.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Any other questions for Louis, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, thanks, Louis. That was awesome. Capital, move on to item 5.1, capital expenditures for the 11 months ended February 28, 2021. Mr. Hannum.
All right, good morning. Jake, are you able to put that report up, or whomever is driving the presentations? I just want to speak to probably the table that is on the top of page 2, which is all well explained in the text of the report, but I just wanted to verbalize it a little bit to cue us up if there's any questions. So the report 5.1 is a update on the total capital spend for the current fiscal year to give an indication of the progress we're making on capital expenditures and what some of the big numbers mean as we continue to manage the capital program. And then, as Louis alluded to earlier, some of the impacts it has on the operational side of the budget. Excuse me. So in a very high level, what this table is trying to show to the board here is in this first column called total budget available, that's an aggregation of all of the current capital projects from the current fiscal year and previous years that projects weren't completed in. So it's really all what we call open work orders, or projects that have the potential to be in progress that we're working on. And there's a total of $183 million in that category. The next column shows that prior to the start of the current fiscal year, we spent $19 million against those work orders. So some of these are projects from previous years that we have begun in previous years and we continue to work on. Critically for our activity for this year, the third column is the capital money spent to date to the end of February within this fiscal year, and that's the plus $50 million. So that's the active expenditure to date within the current fiscal year. The next column simply totals those two to show that we've got 70 million spent to date against the 183 million. We further go on to show that the next column is just the math of the remaining budget, the money that's available to spend against those projects. Now, importantly, we forecast in the next column of what do we believe we'll have spent as of the end of March once all the bills are in and paid, is this $86+ million will be the actual expenditure. And there is a bit of a lag in reporting, because as if you can appreciate, we're doing capital work, contractor does work, we complete the work, they process an invoice, they send an invoice along, we pay the invoice, and work done in December, maybe just starting to hit the books in March. So there is a bit of a lag. That's why there's quite a jump from the actual 70 at the end of February to projected plus 86 at the end of the fiscal year, as we start to account for all the work in the last couple of months at year end. But really, it's at this point that we can start to aggregate and project on what it tells us about our capacity or our direction for the year. It means that of the $183 million we had to spend on capital, we'll have spent close to 87 million on the actual projects. So there's close to a $100 million gap there. And in simple terms, about $50 million of that will carry forward into next year to complete projects from the current fiscal year or the previous fiscal year that are in progress. Projects that we had originally anticipated to be complete by the end of this fiscal year, but for a variety of reasons are active but carrying forward into next year, equates to about $50 million. And that's that difference as we see the total forecasted expenditure to the end of the projects, which leaves another $50 million, which at this point in time, we're projecting to be unexpended on current projects. And as the report notes, that will be available to be reallocated to existing projects and to fund future capitals. And the reason that number appears large is that we're playing a little bit of catch up this year. For the last number of years, projects that for a variety of reasons did not proceed because of reprioritization or inability to deliver were just kind of on hold from a capital perspective, and the capital funds just kept carrying forward as available. This year, we're going to acknowledge those projects that will not proceed, and the money will formally go back and be reallocated. So, you know, in simple terms, what we're trying to say, you know, we plan to spend $70 million on capital this year and another $50 million next year on current year projects, and $50 million from the current funding will be made available to future capital projects. And so that's really the scorecard that we're trying to present here, is this aggregated total spend and our forecast of the spend and where all the capital money is going to be allocated. So that's simply what this report is meant to do. It'll be updated at each board meeting. Now, the next board meeting will be able to show the formal end of year expenditures, and we'll also be starting then to track the net new capital projects from the current approved 21-22 capital budget, adding those now to the new total available budget, and again, moving it forward. Our goal here is to make sure we're managing all work orders, including work from previous years, because that's truly the work that we're trying to get done here. So that's the summary that this presents. Any questions or more detail that you'd like me to go in?
Any questions for Jamie, ladies and gentlemen? Ted?
Thank you, Jamie. So it's just with regard to the amount of budget that's available. What were the main drivers for that? Because it looks like I'm just curious if we over budgeted on projects, or if there was just a whole bunch of projects that we approved, which we decided we didn't need to do. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think I understand your question. We show $183 million of total projects. So that is an aggregation of primarily the 2021 approved capital budget and a selection of projects from the 3 or 4 previous years where projects were funded and not completed. And so that what makes the aggregation of the total budget. I think to the reality of your question is why is there still 100 million unexpended? It's a two-part answer. The first 50 is simply in projects that are in progress and will proceed to completion into next capital year. But then there are a series of approximately $50 million worth of projects where the projects won't be proceeding. And there's 3 or 4 categories of projects there. There are some projects that close and they're completed under budget because of tender results or changes in scope. So there's some underspending on the completion of projects. There's other projects that through prioritization don't get undertaken. They were projected to be needed, but through different operational changes, the actual project wasn't required to be delivered. Or there may be an external project where we were going to cost share with another party and another party didn't proceed with their project, therefore our project couldn't be completed and it's deferred to later years. So there's a number of categories, and that $50 million that won't get expended is really an aggregation of projects from probably the last 7 or 8 years of projects that were underspent on or didn't get delivered. And it's this year that we're really focusing on that accounting activity to kind of take those locked in funds that are locked in previous year's capital budgets and move them into an area where we can actually relocate those as a funding source going forward.
Okay. Was there any particular project, or actually more importantly, is there anything that should get done that isn't going to get done?
So I would say no. Importantly, it's the $50 million in projects that are still carrying forward. A lot of those projects are ones that simply had delays in tendering time, delays in permitting approvals, delays in regulatory approvals that staggered the approach. A good example would be the large new reservoir we're building on top of Hemlock in Bedford South. It's a large, $10-12 million expenditure from last year. Our approvals were a little lagged, the contractor's process is a little lagged, and the project is about a third complete. They're working through this winter, and they'll be working into midsummer to complete that project. So I would say all of the required infrastructure, that strategically supports the long-term vision of the utility is getting completed. The aggregation of projects that aren't getting completed are simply ones where have been reprioritized, not required because of changes in programming, changes in prioritization, or changes in what some external agencies' work is going on.
Okay. And will some of these projects turn up for approval in subsequent years?
I would say in some form, yes, later on, but more from a global asset management perspective. If we deferred a particular water main project, it may not come back in the same incarnation, but ultimately, we're managing all of the infrastructure. So the demands and the infrastructure needs will all come back. So, there's certain projects that go away because they're no longer required because perhaps a change in process or a change in the business practice. But a lot of the projects that were deferred will come back just through good asset management practices.
If I could add to that, I believe there's a few projects that are straight timing deferrals that are tied to the municipality. For example, the relocation of the existing water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure in conjunction with the Cogswell redevelopment.
Yep.
I think there was 2 integrated streets projects. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie?
Yeah, no, those are excellent examples of where an external agency, in particular the municipality, has not changed their program, but just the pace of their project, which is the lead project, has changed, and we have to follow the timeline schedule that. So Cogswell is a good example. But in any given year in our integrated program where we work together on, a dozen or more projects, often one or few of those projects will lag for external reasons at the municipality, and we will follow the schedule there. But there's many large projects where we would have anticipated to complete the work last year, but through a variety of scheduling and permitting delays, the project got started but wasn't able to be completed, and will finish through the construction season of 2021.
Okay. So with regard to the 50 million, presumably the way that when I did these types of things, I would close out a project and then if there was money left over in the budget, it gets returned. And then as an engineer, I didn't know what they did with it, but I mean, I was wondering what happens to that $50 million. Is that what discretion do we have to use it? Is it going to be used to reduce the ask for next year's capital budget, or does it get returned to something else? Maybe you guys can explain to me so I fully understand.
Well, as detailed in the report, the funding will be available to be reallocated to existing projects. So if there was a particular project that's in progress that happens to have a change in scope or change orders that requires it to go over budget, that would be a source of that funding. But I believe the balance of it would be available to fund future capital budgets. And I would ask Louis to further expand maybe what impact that might have on his, longer range financial planning.
You're muted, Louis. Nope. You're still muted. And you're still muted. Well,
So I say, for instance, is some of this money going for the clarifier project, which came up and needed some extra money? Is that an example?
That would be a perfect example of where a current in-flight project needs additional funds. This would be a source of those funds, and the balance would be available for future capital. So it would reduce the future demands of the other sources of capital funding to a certain amount. So it would have a positive impact on future years' capital funding.
Is this the same thing with like the reservoir at Halifax Water? The one right next to the office that we were putting some extra money, is the same thing?
That's correct. That would be the source of those additional funds. So it will support, the capital funding either on a project basis or, into next year, the net available would be a funding source that would reduce some of the capital requirements on a go-forward basis.
If I could jump in to come at it from the finance angle while Louis is trying to get connected again. From a policy level, the primary capital funding sources, Ted, are depreciation and debt servicing. And we cannot spend those on anything other than capital, if you will. So there's a very detailed spreadsheet and exercise that ensures that the capital funding balances to the capital budget projects. And as projects timing change, or as we look at changing needs or the future year's budget, then we look at those previously approved funding sources as a primary spot to do that financial balancing exercise before we would look at new sources of funding.
This is Louis. I've moved down to Jake's workstation. I'm not sure you can, I'm trying. One of the things I wanted to say, and sorry with the technical issues we're dealing with, is some of that funding is actually from the RDC funds or capital cost contribution funds. So to the extent that those were the funding source for the capital project, we need to make sure whatever projects replace the ones that have been stopped also are eligible for that funding. So that's one of the considerations that we need to have. Sorry about that.
I'll say thank you. No further questions.
Thanks, Ted. Any other questions for Jamie, ladies and gentlemen? No? Okay. I guess you're still up, Jamie, to talk to us about the Williams Lake Road wastewater pump station.
Thank you. I believe this is a fairly straightforward recommendation from staff. One of the major asset classes within our wastewater portfolio are pump stations. We have approximately 170 pump stations that are out within the collection system to move wastewater around our very varied topography within the region to make sure we can get all of the wastewater to our wastewater treatment plants that are near the harbor's edge. So we have an asset management program that identifies the necessary rehabilitation of priority pump stations to ensure they maintain their operability and efficiency and contribute to the overall functioning of the collection system. The Williams Lake Road pump station was identified as a priority for upgrade based on life cycle replacements of its major components, and we had it positioned within the 22-23 capital budget as the kind of the next pumping station to deliver after we got through some priority projects from this year. As we were working through the implementation of the current year program, a particular pump station that had a slightly higher priority on Main Road in Dartmouth, we call it the Autoport pump station right in the Autoport area. We are currently in negotiations with CN on the required land. Sorry about that. We're currently in negotiations with CN on the required lands, And that will require us to defer that project for approximately a year as we work through land negotiations and then detailed design. And we're simply suggesting while we work through that process, let's use the funding envelope in pump stations to complete Williams Lake, which is ready to go from a design perspective. And then we'll use the Williams Lake Road money next year for the auto port. So it's simply aligning the projects to take availability that Williams Lake is ready to proceed, auto port isn't. They're close enough in their priorities that it would still be appropriate to proceed with the project. So Williams Lake would have been a very normal project coming forward next year. We're just advancing it to take advantage of the resources to deliver pump station projects. So we're recommending that we do the Williams Lake pump station rehab this year, and we'll be back to complete the auto port project next year once we get the land negotiation.
All right, this one does require a motion, so can I have a motion for acceptance of the recommendation, please? Moved by Ted. Seconder?
I'll read it.
Okay. Thanks, Ted. Heidi's
I'll
nodding, so
read it.
you beat me on that one.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll read it just to make sure, all right?
Yeah.
I move that the Halifax Water Board approve the construction phase of the William Lake Road Wastewater Pumping Station Rehabilitation Project in the amount of $3.19 million for a revised total project cost of $3.4 million. I so move.
Thanks, Ted. Second? Second by Councillor Cottle. Motion's on the floor, ladies and gentlemen, for discussion. Are there any questions for Jamie? Councillor Cottle?
Hi, thank you. Yes, well, this is not in my district. It is right on the border there. And I'm just wondering, what is the timeline on this? And, you know, just there is a very active group in the Williams Lake area around. Right. And so I'm just thinking communication is probably important because people are going to be asking questions. So just wondering, what is the timeline and what kind of communication will be put out there to let people know what's happening and why?
So with respect to the timeline, we've finalized design, so we're getting ready to go to tender. So there'll be a process of through procurement to tender the project, review it, award it, get things aligned. So probably a physical on the ground construction start won't be till very late spring, perhaps early summer. And the project will probably proceed into this time next year, a little later for the duration of the project it takes. So our typical response to the community would be to communicate with, you know, the variety of folks that live in the area and give them notification of the construction period, who the contractor is, who the contacts are, what to expect from a traffic or pedestrian impact, what to expect from a construction impact perspective, what we've done to mitigate the impact. It's a fairly small footprint project. We'll really be working within the limits of almost the building foundation, replacing mechanical and electrical equipment. There won't be a lot of impact outside of the footprint of the building. So I think it'll be fairly minimal from a community impact, but we will be communicating that to the surrounding community and copy to the councillor in the area. So the only question that would arise, is there anything unique that would require any additional stakeholder engagement? We'd be pleased to be advised on that and extend that in our program.
Okay, I will ask around, but I'm the other side of the road.
Right, I appreciate that, yeah.
So I need to make sure that I get the notice as well and not just Councillor Cleary.
Yeah.
That would be great. I think our boundary goes right down the middle of that lake.
Right, okay.
Okay, and I just noted at the end of that report, it just says something about you know, no regrets. What is it? The proposed expenditure meets no regrets, unavoidable needs approach. What is that?
So several years back, when we completed our 2012 integrated resource plan, the URB, and through some information from the URB consultants, suggested that whilst we had some work to do with respect to data to improve our asset management program, we needed to adopt a no regrets, unavoidable needs approach, which was a way of saying a project's justified, despite maybe still building data out and enhancing our asset renewal program, we could justify a particular project and had no regrets, and there was kind of an unavoidable need to this. And this particular project is in that requirement where it's required to ensure infrastructure system integrity and safety. So we can't not do these types of renewals, or we risk these pumping stations failing, which is a direct barrier to providing our service and a potential environmental impact. So these are critical projects to proceed with. So we make the statement that we're proceeding with no regrets.
Okay, that is good to know, because there's, like I said, a very active watershed group there who looks after all things watershed. So I think they would appreciate knowing that this is moving ahead with no regrets.
Agreed.
Any other questions for Jamie, ladies and gentlemen? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. Motion's on the floor. Can I have a vote for acceptance, please? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. And one more, Jamie, item 5.3, Cobequid looping.
Yes, thank you. So the Cobequid looping Wingate Drive water transmission main project, there is a normal line item in the capital budget that you would have approved in January for the 21-22 capital for the installation of phase 1 of the transmission main project for $1.5 million. And at that level, we wouldn't be back to the board seeking that approval. It'd be done at the GM level, and we go on to the URB to get approval. However, during detailed design for the phase 1 of the transmission main project, we saw an opportunity to potentially do phase 2 at the same time. And just to describe, on Wingate Drive, there is a gap in the water distribution system where there is no water service along a certain portion of Wingate Drive. And that became problematic last year when we had some water main failures in the Sackville area, and we are unable to push some water to some of our customers in Fall River because there was only a single feed to the Fall River area. With the completion of this gap, we would have 2 feeds to the Fall River area, improving our redundancy and reliability of service to the area. Thus, it was an important priority project. However, on the same section, once we were closing the gap in the transmission main and made a continuity of service for this second feed, the next section of existing water pipe is a very small diameter pipe in there just to service the local community. And while the phase 1 pipe would allow us to flow water, we would really be reduced in our total capacity. We could provide residential flows during an emergency, and we would achieve the prime benefit of the phase 1, but with the overall goal of really providing a real duplicate resilient feed to Fall River and potential growth down the road in the Fall River area. There was a phase 2 of that project contemplated. At this time, our designer and our project team are saying, I think there's a real opportunity when we go to tender here that it might be very cost effective to build the 2 phases at once, because it's in the same trench, same time, same disturbance to the community, same disturbance to the road. So we're bringing this forward as an opportunity to do both phases at the same time. Now, we will go to tender, and if the tender results don't show that this is a cost-effective opportunity, we will only proceed with phase 1. But the ask today is to consider the increase in funding so that we have the opportunity to do both phases should the tender results prove that it's a cost-effective and mitigating way to minimize community disruption there by doing 2 projects in multiple years. So the ask is simply to consider funding for the 2 phases at once for economic and community impact mitigation reasons.
All right, this again requires motion, so could I have a motion for acceptance? Councilor Lovelace?
I'm happy to put it on the floor.
Could you read it for me, please?
Yeah. I move that the Halifax Water Board approve the construction phase funding for the Cobequid looping Wingate Drive water transmission main phase 1 for $1,500,000 and phase 2 for $950,000 for an estimated total project cost of $2,500,000.
Thank you very much. Have a second, please.
Commissioner Rawlings, second.
Thank you. Any discussion, ladies and gentlemen?
I would just say that I like the fact that, we're looking at doing this at the same time. I think the, mitigation for construction hassle, you know, the construction impact that it has on residents overall. It's nice to be able to kind of look at this phase 1 and phase 2, you know, together at the same time. So I appreciate that while it is an overage, you know, it's also something that we have to do in the future. So I'm glad to see that we're looking at cost savings to put it together. Thank you.
Excellent. Ted?
I think this is a great idea to do them together. I had a question on the probable cost estimate. It's on 146 of the package. It's from Design Point. And I was looking, and the way it looks to me is that the costs are materials, but I was wondering, does that include labor, design, inspection, other overhead?
Are you able to bring that up, Jake, so we can speak specifically to Commissioner's concern?
Yeah, but I can, Jamie, just give me a moment.
Oh, sorry, yes. Whomever is in control, sorry about that. I just want to be very clear to your point.
At page 146 on the
Is it
From
up
the
there?
PDF package, it's 146. Oh,
And are you seeing it?
no.
that is not it.
Maybe it's 146 from the design report, is it?
140. Go back to 142 because my package only has 396 pages in it, not 400. Nope. Go forward a little bit.
Minimize this a bit just in case.
Let's go forward a couple more pages. Oh, you might have to go forward. Yeah, keep going. Keep going.
Page 150?
Next page. There we go.
Oh, that's encouraging.
So I got the
Okay.
cost estimate, and yeah, that's it.
Okay, right, okay. Is it in the context of this one then?
Yes.
Okay. So if you want to re-ask your question, then we can look at it in the context of.
Okay, so the total cost here, if I got it right, is 1.46 million, and all I see is material. Well, I might be misunderstanding. I thought there might be other things like the labor, design, inspection.
Yeah, so this is done in a unit rate format. So any one of those line items where there's a unit description, 200 millimeter ductile iron class 52 water main, that rate of $847 is an all-inclusive unit to supply, install, all-inclusive cost for that unit. So when you aggregate the units, you get a total completed project. So it's material, it's labor. If it doesn't say there's restoration, often that unit would even include restoration of the road, all ancillary materials, and all other ancillary project costs, permits, etc., are drilled down into the unit rates.
That answers my question. Thank you, Jamie. Makes sense.
Any other questions? Commissioner Rawlings? Not quite counselor yet. I hope I'm foreshadowing Colleen. Or...
No, Commissioner is fine. Jamie, I was just intrigued by the pavement reinstatement design report. Is that typical, having to do a report just on pavement reinstatement?
Well, often it's just trying to get ahead of the municipality's requirements. They have fairly specific requirements depending on the current condition of the asphalt will drive whether we can just patch the trench, whether we have to patch the trench and then do a thin overlay or do some level of reconstruction. And so it drives both the methodology of how we have to restore it, but also the cost that we have to pay the municipality for a pavement impact fee. So it depends on the condition of the road and the nature of our work. So often these reports are done to try to anticipate what the fee structure would be that might only be identified after the municipality reviews it and issues as a permit. So it's kind of just to try to pre-calculate where we'll be and to help often inform the municipality where we think the project aligns with respect to restoration and impact fees.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Abstentions? Hearing none, motion carried. Advance, before we move on to item 6, I want to digress from the agenda for just a second. This is our last meeting with Mr. Hannum. And Jamie, on behalf of the Board of Directors, please accept our congratulations on your retirement. And thank you very much for your excellent service to Halifax Water over the years. It has always been a pleasure. And we will miss you, but we are envious of your pending retirement.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the kind words. And like I've said to a lot of people, I enjoy every day I come to work, and it's an absolute pleasure. And this is one of the exciting parts, getting out and interacting with folks like you and you know, part of the bigger picture process. So thank you much for the kind words, and I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully we can all engage personally and professionally down the road, and looking forward to the next opportunities. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Jamie.
Congratulations.
Moving on to item 6, corporate governance manual. And I don't even have to look. I know this is Heidi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the report was provided to everyone, and ultimately what we're asking for is acceptance of the changes. A red line version of the corporate governance manual was attached to the report, along with a few comments from me that were there really to illustrate why the changes were made, and also to illustrate if there was questions or if people were not sure, we could have a discussion about anything. But ultimately, the information is there. Unless there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I see these as being amendments that are necessary in order to ensure that our corporate governance manual remains up to date and relevant.
Prior to going to discussion or questions, can I have a motion, please? Don't everybody speak at once.
I'll move that.
Okay, can you read the motion, please?
Thank you. I move that Halifax Water Board approve the revisions of the corporate governance model as attached to the board report dated March 1st, 2021. So moved.
Seconded?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any questions or discussion for Heidi?
I don't have any questions.
Go ahead.
No, I don't have any questions, which is unusual for me, but good job, Heidi.
We went through these in a significant amount of detail. Executive Heidi has been very proactive. They were all great suggestions that you know, went through with no discussion at executive level. That was for sure. But if there are any other observations, now's the time. All right, I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Contrary minded? Abstentions? Motion carried. Item 7, appointment of the board vice chair and confirmation of appointments to board committees. Heidi, are you speaking to this?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You will all note that there's been no material provided with this particular item because it is an item that is for discussion. I will say, however, that I have a pretty good idea of what people might say, and so I did prepare a motion in advance just in case, but it can be amended if we need to. But ultimately, as we well know, Commissioner Rawlings very graciously stepped up to be our vice chair in the fall of last year in order to replace Russell Walker, who had stepped down. And her appointment ends next week on Wednesday. I'm sure she's very sad about that, but so as of April 1st, we're in the market for a new vice chair. Becky Kent, Councillor Kent, has agreed to become our vice chair on a go-forward basis, and so we're seeking approval from the board today for appointment as vice chair of Becky Kent. And then also with regard to each of our committees, we're also seeking confirmation of the various appointments to those committees, because the changes that you just approved to the corporate governance manual now allow a little bit more flexibility as far as the composition of each of those committees. The previous wording reflected the other iteration, the first iteration of wording, which tried to accommodate the distinction between public and private representatives on our board. We've now eliminated that, and ultimately it will be our desire to compose each committee on the basis of the skills and desires of each of the board members. And so with that, Jake, if you want to pull up the motion to be approved today. Ultimately, what it is, it's each of the four committees. And we have the executive committee. Can you make it a little bigger, please, Jake? That's perfect. Much better for my eyes. Thank you. So we have the executive committee, which will be comprised of Craig McMullen, Becky Kent, and Colleen Rawlings. The audit and finance committee, which will be Ted Farquhar as chair, Craig McMullen, Becky Kent, Pamela Lovelace as members. The environment, health, and safety committee, which will be Colleen Rawlings as chair, Kathy Deagle-Gammon and Patty Cuddle as members, and the Enterprise Risk Management Committee, which is the only terms of reference that has very specific references related to composition, and that was a desire of the board. It's each of the chairs of the other three subcommittees that comprise this board, and so it will be Craig McMullen, Colleen Rawlings, and Ted Farquhar, and then according to the terms of reference of the committee, they will choose a chair amongst them when they meet. And their first meeting, I believe, is scheduled for June of this year.
All right. So could I have a motion for those, please?
So I can move that, and then I have a question.
Okay.
So
Can you read the motion first?
yes, that's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
So I move that Halifax Water Board appoint Becky Kent as Vice Chair effective April 1st, 2021. B, that the Halifax Water Board make the following board committee appointments to the Executive Committee: Craig McMullen as Chair, Becky Kent and Colleen Rawlings as members. To the Audit and Finance Committee, Ted Farquhar as Chair and Craig McMullen, Becky Kent, Pamela Lovelace as members. To the Environment, Health and Safety Committee, Colleen Rawlings as Chair and Kathy Deagle-Gammon and Patty Cuddle as members. To the Enterprise Risk Management Committee, Craig McMullen, Colleen Rawlings, and Ted Farquhar as members, with the chair to be selected in accordance with the committee's terms of reference. I so move.
Second.
Rawlings can second.
Excellent. Discussion. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you. So I guess my only question is that there's no terms associated with this motion. So I'm just wondering, is this an annual or is this per our term, which I believe is different for many of the members. So I'm just wondering if we could have a clarification on that, Heidi.
Certainly, the term is associated with your term of appointment to the board because those terms run either 2 or 3 years, and we see that as being an appropriate term for each of the committees as well.
Okay, fantastic. I was just wondering how long it would be connected to the Audit and Finance Committee. Thank you.
And to be clear, things can change. It simply requires a motion of the board, but that's generally speaking how we approach it.
Okay, thanks so much.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you. I'm happy to support this. I feel like I'm going in a little bit blind. Is it safe to assume that we will get some information forthcoming around the mandate of each of them and the timing is scheduling commitments and things like that? Because it's, yeah, I expected that it was coming. I just thought maybe we'd have a conversation a little bit before this, but that's okay. I trust that this is a good mixture. It gives everyone some form of a role, but any information you can give us to help us, time management would be really helpful.
Certainly, and so what I can say is that the current version of the corporate governance manual is available in the resource section on Diligent. Attached to the corporate governance manual are the terms of reference for each of the committees. Of course, you've just approved amendments to the manual, and so we will be updating that resource probably within the next few days. And so, but certainly the substance of the mandate for each of the committees did not change. It was simply the terms surrounding the composition. And so if you do want to look to that document now before we upload the newer version, you'll still get a context of the mandate for each of these committees. With regard to scheduling, I think most commissioners already have the appointments because there wasn't a whole lot of shifting. We had done some of this prior to this this particular motion. But in your case, Commissioner Kent, obviously you'll be added to a few of the committees now and their appointments. And so those appointments will be sent to you, I would say, again, probably within the next day or so.
And we can add to that the schedule for the meeting dates for the board meetings and all of the subcommittees was approved by the board in November. And we will continue with that practice in terms of getting the meetings approved well in advance and getting those appointments out in your calendars. So now that we've got final composition set, we'll make the necessary adjustments to the meeting times. And as you're assuming the vice chair role now, we'll be reaching out to schedule a meeting with you just to go through the vice chair roles in the corporate governance manual again. And we also have to get you set up as the signing authority for HRM. So we'll be taking those steps, or excuse me, for Halifax Water.
Okay, and is the, just a, I don't know, a disclaimer for the November meetings, that was a really hectic time for us. I'm not sure how much I actually remember. So if there is any kind of updates, or, well, just sort of pump out some more of that information, some of those schedules we agree to, and all of that would be helpful. Thank you. There's a lot going on.
I believe in Diligent, in the reference section, there is a full schedule of all of the dates of the board and the subcommittee for the remainder of the year.
Is that in the resource center? Because I'm looking at the list at home in resource.
It's in the resource center, yes.
Okay.
And I will just explain, because there is a bit of a method to the madness, so to speak, as far as how we scheduled those committee meetings. Generally speaking, they're held around 3 weeks in advance of a board meeting.
Okay.
And so you have a set schedule of 5 board meetings, and so 3 weeks, give or take, in advance of that, you will also likely have your other committee meetings.
Okay. I see them under terms of reference. There's the three committees. Would the schedules be within those documents?
No, it would be a separate document. What I'll do is I'll get Lorna to circulate that around to everybody.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Have it, and it'll be available. But she will be adding you, Commissioner Kent, to the appointments as well.
Okay, great.
Any other questions? Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you. I just have a quick question, just to keep information accurate across the lines with regards to HRM and the water board. Is there someone here who could speak to making sure that HRM has their website updated with current information that reflects the board? I was just looking at it not long ago, and it's quite outdated. So I'm not sure if there is anyone on this call right now that's responsible for connecting with HRM just to make sure that they have their halifax.ca website, or should I just send a note to somebody, I don't know who, to get them to update that information, just so that, you know, the both platforms are reflecting the current and accurate information.
We'll take care of that. Jake Fulton from our communications group is on the call, so I will ask Jake to reach out to our communication peers at HRM.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate that. And with regards to the resource center, it is fantastic. And I wonder if that there could be, excuse me, a tab there that highlights kind of a list of all of the other regulatory pieces that we want to make sure that we follow. So while I do see Halifax Water Act and you know, Utilities Act and that kind of thing, you know, Environment Act, Kathy, you rhymed off a whole bunch of others, public safety, just to get those indicated in there would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Great. Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Abstentions? Motion carried. Let's move on to item 8, corporate balance scorecard. Kathy.
Thank you. So there is a short presentation on this, which Jake is going to pull up. I'm going to try to get through this relatively quickly because we do have the odor strategy later on the agenda, and I want to make sure there's time for discussion of that. But the corporate balance scorecard is really important because it sets the framework for how we will really evaluate our performance at the end of the year. So next slide, Dick. Halifax Water has actually had a corporate balance scorecard program in place now for 20 years. This is the 20th year of measuring performance using a corporate balance scorecard. And the corporate balance scorecard approach was developed with grassroots engagement from staff at Halifax Water and the Halifax Water Board at that point in time. And on an annual basis, the scorecard comes forward to the Halifax Water Board. It's developed based on our business plan and the strategic kind of directions we're getting from the board. So, and then again at the end of the year, we'll report back on how we did at achieving those targets that were set by the Halifax Water Board. Next slide. So in summary, it helps us align within the organization and make sure everyone is focused on the strategic objectives, and it does help us measure performance. And the starting point for ensuring there's alignment is making sure that the strategic objectives, which we refer to as critical success factors, and the organizational indicators that we set all align to the mission and vision of Halifax Water that's been approved by the Halifax Water Board. Here it is on the slide. I'm not going to read through it. Next slide. And so there are 8 critical success factors. And underneath each of those critical success factors, there are some organizational indicators, which are really the detailed method we use to measure performance. Next slide. And organizational indicators are set to measure organizational performance, not an individual performance. So at an individual level, non-union employees, for example, at Halifax Water would have specific goals set for them for the coming year that we use to monitor and manage individual performance. And individual performance also links back to what we're trying to achieve as an organization, which is measured through the organizational indicators. Next slide. And what we select as organizational indicators, we try to zero in on a subset of those indicators, which can be really quantitatively and objectively measured, and use that as the basis for an organizational performance award program. So for the past 20 years, there has been an organizational award program to incent organizational performance and achievement of the strategic objectives. And the program pays for itself because there are some financial targets set around driving us to become increasingly efficient and save money. And if we are achieving that objective, then in theory, we're generating sufficient money to fund the program for the year. There have been, out of the last 20 years, at least 3 years where Halifax Water didn't achieve all of the objectives, so there would have been no organizational award payout. Next slide. And the organizational award program is only eligible to employees who've been employed with Halifax Water for the majority of the year. So if somebody comes in and they're only here for 1 or 2 months, for example, then they would not qualify because they haven't been present long enough to be able to impact or influence the organizational performance. So the first critical success factor area is high quality drinking water. That is number 1. And I'm not going to talk too much about it because we're not proposing any changes to the organizational indicators. So if you look at the 21-22 target column, there are no changes from the targets in previous years. So we're not proposing a increase or decrease compared to the target for prior year. And one thing I will mention as I move through these slides, I'm going to focus on the targets for 2021-22. I'm not going to talk about our achievement of the current year. We'll be coming back to talk to the board about that and present the results at the June board meeting. We have to wait until the completion of the fiscal year, which ends at March 31st. And as many of you would know, although the fiscal year ends March 31st, we're continuing to do activity on closing and collecting data well into April. So it's probably more likely around the end of April that we have good data. But we have included a column with our forecasted result for 2021. And that's there really for information purposes, because when you're looking at how we're setting the targets for this year, it's useful to consider not just what the targets for the past year were, but what have the historic results been. So we're showing you the audited final results for 2019-20 in the far right column. And we're also showing you the projected actual result for the current fiscal year 2020-21. And then we're showing you on the far right the proposed targets for the coming fiscal year, which begins April 1st. Next slide. In the service excellence critical success factor area, we are proposing a slight change in the customer satisfaction with service metric. So that's measured through the customer survey, and that's the item that's shown on the first row. And you can see that the target in 2020-21 was 90%, and it has been 90% for several years. We're proposing to increase that target this year to 95%. And the reason we're recommending 95% is because we've actually been able to achieve 96% in the last 2 years. And we're nervous going higher than 95% for 2021, because although we've achieved 96% in the last 2 years, we don't think that's a given. We think there are going to be probably at least 3 challenges that will make 95% a good stretch target for us. Those 3 challenges are going to be, ongoing economic concerns or impacts from COVID-19, and the fact that we have a fairly unusual number of accounts over 120 days past due means we'll be doing collection activities this year. We also have the provincial roads transfer, which may cause some changes to stormwater service area. So there may be some additional stormwater service customers, which may have an impact on the customer satisfaction. And the third thing that is probably going to occur is, for sure, the cost of service hearing. A cost of service hearing is a public hearing where there's a lot of discussion about how costs get allocated and how the pie is diced up and how rates are changed. It's not going to be an actual rate increase this year, but it is going to prompt discussion about how rates are set and when rates will increase. And on another note, the rates for wastewater service do actually increase effective April 1st this year. So we think if we can achieve 95% as our customer satisfaction with service, as measured by the independent third-party customer survey, that we will be doing well. Next slide. Oh, actually, sorry, Jake, if you could back up one. I didn't put any narrative in the report around this, but the one other change that you can see on this slide is wastewater service outages, number of connection hours per 1,000 customers. So the target for this year is 4. The target in 2020-21 was 8. You can see that the number achieved for 1920 and 2021 was significantly less than 8. So it makes sense to tighten up that target. That being said, we still have a lot of aging infrastructure, and we also have a lot of capital work going on, which also may increase service outages, as we may have to take things out of service as we're doing capital projects temporarily. But the target that's recommended was developed by the operations staff, and the Director of Operations, Sushila Roar, is here on the call if anybody has a question about that one. So that is also a change from the target last year. I'm just going to pause for a second to see if there are any questions on service excellence and the proposed changes. If not, I'll move on to the next category. No? Okay, next slide, Jake. Responsible financial management. There's no change to the methodology really around how these are set. We look at the operating revenue and expenses, and then we propose a reduction. So the 82% target means that we are aiming to reduce our operating expenses $1.6 million less than what was budgeted. So if we do better than budget, essentially, we will achieve an operating expense to revenue ratio of 82%. The annual cost per customer connections are calculated by taking the budgeted operations expenses, dividing it by the number of customer connections, and then reducing that by 3%. So we're looking for a 3% efficiency in the cost per customer connection. Next slide. The next area is effective asset management. And there are two areas I want to draw your attention to on this slide in terms of, well, three, I guess, in terms of the targets. The I&I reduction, the number of inspections to identify private property discharge. We had reduced the target in 2021 because we weren't sure what impact COVID-19 was going to have on our ability to get into private property and do those inspections. I want to recognize the regulatory services team did a bang-up job this year, and the achievement far exceeded that target. So we're back to a more aggressive target in 21-22 for the number of inspections on private property for I&I. The next row down, peak flow reduction from wet weather management projects. There is a change in that target, but not a change in methodology. So the methodology is that operations is developing that target, looking at the capital projects under the wet weather management program for the year, and what the expected peak flow reduction expected to be achieved by those capital projects actually is. And when a capital project is complete as part of the wet weather management program, there's actual flow monitoring that looks at whether or not targeted reductions were achieved. So that organizational indicator is a little bit different this year because it's linked to the planned wet weather management capital projects for 21-22. The only other change on this slide is the capital budget expenditures, the percentage of budget spent by the end of the fiscal year. So the corporate balance scorecard target for this for the last couple of years, and it's a relatively new target. It was a target that was only set, I would say, 3 years ago. The target has been for us to spend between 80 to 90% of the capital budget in the year it's approved. Halifax Water's never achieved that. And in looking across what other municipalities and utilities are achieving, we may have set that target too aggressively. And it's because of the nature of the projects being multi-year and complexity of some of the projects in terms of the types of approvals you have to get and the necessity to secure land and agreements with private landowners also in some cases for easements before we can proceed with projects. So we're proposing a more realistic target for this year would be for us to spend 70 to 80% of the capital budget within the year it's approved. And that would still be a stretch target. It's not going to be easy for us to achieve that level of spend. Next slide. Workplace safety and security. The targets here are similar to prior years with the exception of one. The lost time accidents target, we're proposing to tighten that up. And that's to reflect that we've had good improvement and good adherence to our safety policies. And I would say we've had an improvement in safety culture over the last few years, and that we're achieving and exceeding some of our safety targets. So to further promote focus on safety culture, we want to tighten that target and change it from 2 to 3 lost time accidents per year per 100 of employees to a range of 1.5 to 2 accidents per year per 100 employees. Next slide. Regulatory compliance, we are not proposing any changes to the organizational indicators in this area. Next slide. Environmental stewardship, we are also not proposing significant change. We are proposing a return to normal on the environmental stewardship line in the top row, the number of ICI properties inspected by pollution prevention each year. So similar to the I&I inspections that was referenced earlier under effective asset management, I believe, we had made a temporary reduction in the target for 2021 in light of COVID-19. We are proposing to resume the normal target of 500 in 21-22. Next slide. Motivated and satisfied employees, we're not proposing any changes to our targets on this slide. So these are the recommendations, and if you move to the next slide, Jake, the board will be able to see this is just the subset of the 12 organizational indicators. Of the 30 total organization indicators, we have 12 that are really able to be externally and objectively measured, which feed into the organizational award program. Next slide. And just to give you an example of how that works, where we score in terms of achieving those targets results in a total organizational indicator score, which is then applied to a theoretical award amount. So as I mentioned before, in some years there's been no award. In other years we've had awards that have ranged from $600 per employee. I don't think we've ever had $1,000 per employee, but we probably have had in the 900 range in some years. And it's really based on what we achieve. And if our achievement across the board is less than 7 on those indicators, then there is no award. So next slide. I believe that's it. Yeah, just a summary. So our track record is that the organizational award program of the corporate balance scorecard has been really positive. The board, council, and the utility and review board have supported it in the past and have found these metrics useful. In addition to us presenting our results to the Halifax Water Board in June, we do take them to Halifax Council when we present the accountability report that usually occurs around end of July, beginning of August. And we will also report on what we achieve when we do our annual general meeting with the public. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Can I have a motion, please? Ted, you want to read the motion?
Yep. The Halifax Water Board approve 1, corporate balance scorecard targets for 2020-2021 fiscal year as detailed in the attached presentation, and 2, the organizational award program tied to the outcomes of the 12 organizational indicators as detailed in the attached presentation. I so move.
Seconded.
Can I just bring something to the attention? There's actually an error in the motion. Are the targets now for the 2021-22 year?
Yes, they are.
Are you okay with a friendly amendment to your motion, Ted?
Yes.
Okay. You're okay with that, Councillor Lovelace?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, any questions, ladies and gentlemen? We're
Can I
good.
just make a comment? I just want to say thank you,
Sure.
Kathy. You know, it's a lot of really good information. Again, for new commissioners to see this level of detail specifically for what we're striving for. I really appreciate it, and thank you.
No
Thank
other
you to the
questions?
Halifax Water team, because although I get the privilege of presenting the report, it's the team behind me who are helping develop it and delivering the results, more importantly.
Good point. Thank you.
All right, I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Abstentions? Motion carried. Halifax, item 9, Halifax Water Odor Strategy and Service Level. I believe Sushil is speaking to this.
Yeah, and while he turns his camera on, I'm just going to do a brief intro to say that this was in the business plan objectives approved by the Halifax Water Board for us to deliver this to you for the 2020-21 fiscal year, for us to bring it to you by March. And Sushil and his team have worked very hard on it. So over to Sushil.
Good morning. Yeah, as Kathy said, this is not Sushil's work, this is team's work. And I have the privilege of presenting this to the board. And in fact, in my time here, this is the first order report that you're seeing here. We've had these odor issues in the past. You know, every sewer system has these odor issues in extended warm weather times and what have you. This is very typical. As they say, sewers are stinky. And no matter how much we try, this odor does escape the system because primarily it's an open system, because most gravity sewer systems are open systems through the manhole covers, through leaky pipes, what have you, and the homeowners being connected to it through a gravity pipe. It does travel up when somebody's P-trap is not working right, or there are plumbing not done properly and what have you. So there are several reasons for it and whatnot. So over time, and again, the issue is very important because that's what the public sees and experiences, well, not sees, but smells and experiences, and it is obnoxious, and it does actually impact quality of life in some ways. So we took a kind of a strategic approach a couple of years ago and said, okay, we have some problem areas what we should address. And we actually started addressing those problem areas very aggressively. And those problem areas primarily were downtown Dartmouth, some areas of a Milko treatment plant, and then downtown Halifax, and also in Eastern Passage around the treatment plant and Hines Road area and whatnot. So we took some strategies and actually have been very successful at that. So once we kind of calmed that down a little bit, we said, okay, what is this looking like? What's our level of service here, and how can we address that level of service? So this report, and we had engaged a consultant in the past, and they came out with certain strategies which had operational and capital strategies in place. But however, the biggest piece in there was we did not have good enough of a monitoring data or the data to see, okay, what is the nature of these complaints? Are they public side? Are they private side? Because as you know, when the odor gets in the air, it doesn't see any boundaries. We just have to, that's the challenge that sometimes we have addressing these things. So a couple of years ago, while we did some changes on the operation strategies, injecting some chemicals and whatnot into the system and taking some proactive approach, and planning our operations work such as cleaning, inserting carbon inserts, using some deodorizers in the manholes, etc. We started to look at it comprehensively and also strategically deployed some, they call them odologs. It's kind of a equipment that goes in the manholes and whatnot, and see where is it coming from, how is it moving up or down, what type of weather interacts with it and whatnot. It's a kind of a complex mechanism that goes behind it to understand that science. So, and additionally, within that strategy and coming to this report, what we did was we did a national survey through our national benchmarking program and see what are other cities doing. And also we did kind of an internet search of other municipalities, other utilities, what are they doing about the odor concerns. And what we found was generally there were, across the country, there were about 8 or 10 that participated in that national benchmarking survey and came back with a variety of tools that they were engaging. And also through the internet search, we did what we could find about 10 plus utilities and whatnot is what are they doing. So looking at all of that data, what came back was actually the strategies that we have in place are very effective. And that's where this report talks about is we probably should stay with that strategy because of the number of factors. There are programs in the country which range into hundreds of millions of dollars to the operational strategies that we have in place. And what we found was our operational strategy of actually treating the odor to the treatment plants is very effective. Within the collection system, as Jamie talked about it earlier, when we have long force mains and long systems, the odor, you can mitigate it, the symptom, it's hard to cure it depending on the topography and the retention time in the sewers. So what we also found was the monitoring and actually the service level program that we have is actually leading in the country in terms of how we get the complaints, how we triage the complaints, and how we actually dispatch crews and try and manage customer expectations around odor complaints. So with that kind of a short, brief summary of it, our recommendation here is basically to, in your report, what's outlined is there's category A and category B customers, and we're suggesting we stay on the same strategy what we have now, although we have a number of things that we're doing in terms of the recommendations in the report that those activities, we're enhancing those activities. However, the service level basically says at the strategy level saying that category A and category B type of complaints get dealt with in the manner we're dealing with them today. We will continue to collect the data and we will continue to improve our process. Additionally, what we've also done is any of the projects now through the capital program, in the past, there was hardly any attention paid to the odor issues. So what we're doing now is, as a part of our engineering design of these newer systems, expansions, what have you, we are given the applicability in how long and far the sewers are from the treatment plants. We are asking the consultants to actually comment on the odor issues and odor generation potential of these sewers as well. So with that brief overview, I'll leave it open for questions. Thank you.
Just for clarity, the level of service in terms of our response that you're being asked to approve is on page 2 of that report. It's the table in the middle of the page that shows our response times.
Okay, can I have a motion to put it on the floor, please?
I can do that.
Okay,
I move that the Halifax Water Board endorse Halifax Water's established response and level of service to respond to odor complaints within the wastewater and combined collection systems.
have a seconder, please. Ted?
I'll second that.
Okay. All right, any questions for Shashil, ladies and gentlemen? Councillor Kent.
Thank you. No surprise, Cecile, I have questions. So I happen to host my district hosts one of those problem areas. And I have to say, as a councillor, as in whatever role I've been in this community, including a resident, Eastern Passage is problematic. Eastern Passage. We've had a conversation around Shishil. To be honest, it was so early. I'm going to ask for a second in our mandate. I'm going to ask for a second tour so we can talk about this again, especially with the summer coming. I mean, what I recall from that is that there absolutely is a lot of attention being given to the odor issues, and I'm really glad to hear that. When I looked at this report, I zoomed into page 212. Can we go to 212? I think it's, yeah. No, it was the risks. Hang on a second. I'm gonna, maybe 219. I had it wrong. Yeah, I think it was 219. Okay, so the limitations on this report was that this actual report is based on information.
Sorry, can you put that up? Heidi, are you driving that?
I can, yeah, I'm just about to, so.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Kinch.
Okay. Talks about that the records of these complaints that you're using to drive this particular report are only up to and including 2018. We're now into 2021. Is there, are we able to have some comments around how the complaints may have looked last year versus what they would have been on the table in 2018? I just want to make sure that we are capturing the current sort of conditions. I have more questions, but we can start there.
So, where?
So let me know if I do not.
Is that the page that you're referring to, Councillor Kinch? No.
It's the next
No,
page.
it's actually there's a secondary piece to it, and it's actually the very last page. Oops, go back. Yes, assessment limitations. There we go. Odor complaints record only back to 2018.
Yes, so what this is saying is these complaints we started collecting this data in 2018 and the data is current to 2020. So
okay.
in what you see here is the executive summary of the report, but the larger report does have data from 2018, 19, and 20.
Okay, good. So what we're doing is, should we approve this approach, then we are, but within it is the context of we have current information, so we're looking at it from a current place. So yeah, great. That's information I wanted. I'm still struggling with the thoughts as a counselor, wearing my counselor hat, of coming into the summer season with the odors that are coming out of the Eastern Passage plant. And I'm struggling with the notion of how do we educate the public about the tremendous amount of energy and work that goes into keeping these situations at the lowest level we can possibly have it. There is information, particularly out in the Eastern Passage area, I can't speak to the others, around the notion, and Shishil, I think we talked about this, the notion that there is infrastructure that leads into a lot of these plants that are very, very old and came from the old County of Halifax infrastructure that may also be contributing to some of the odor problems, in that the grade may not be sufficient enough to be transporting all of the matter that goes through our waste to our waste treatment plants. Once it gets to the waste treatment plants, I have a lot of confidence in what we have in place, certainly in the Dartmouth treatment plant and the Eastern Passage treatment plant, because I was part of both of those when they were being built. But around the infrastructure that is leading into it, are they monitored? Is that monitored as well? And in situations where we have excessive repetitive odor, like Eastern Passage, is there a place for looking at all of that as well, not just the treatment plant activity?
So I guess few parts to your question.
Okay.
Let me address the last part first around the infrastructure. The infrastructure is old or older. Relatively, it's not that old in that area. It is old, but compared to Halifax, it's not that old. Now, that infrastructure also was installed to grade. There are certain low spots that are there in some of the pressure sewers. However, this is a matter of retention time of the sewage where it's coming from, which we cannot change because it's coming from way back from Cole Harbor and further reaches. So what we can do is, once it gets closer to those odorous areas, we can treat it there, or we can treat it at the source back, or intermittent points on the system. So what we've been doing is we've been actually monitoring, as you said, you had a question in there, comment in there about where are we monitoring in the system. Those odor logs are actually placed at the strategic locations. For example, there are a few on Hines Road. There's one up at the surge tank. And at the surge tank, that's where we inject the chemical as well. The way it works is it's all interconnected with a SCADA system. And once we sense that, certain parameters are going low around Hines Road, it will actually communicate back with the pumps and whatnot and inject more chemical. So that's how we're managing that. And generally, it's very successful. We used to have a lot of complaints from that area. They have subsided. There's a couple of folks there which actually are very cooperative. They understand the issue. We've been educating them quite a bit. And the system was, and what we found actually as recently as 2 months ago was, or like not about a month ago, was the problem actually wasn't prevalent on the system per se. There was some problem in the system, but the larger problem was in the internal plumbing. And we've helped those customers.
Okay.
We are helping those customers with those issues. Going on to the public education side, I think when we met at the plant, I think we are open to doing open houses, bring people to the plant, but the COVID restrictions at this point are limiting that. And if there is an interested group of people, we can go out and put out the invitation, and we can follow those COVID protocols, and we can get those actually on the road in the short order before the warm season hits, if you will.
Yeah.
Because the complaints actually start coming, sometimes depending on how dry and low flows we get during the summertime. It's mid-July to sometime they can last as far as November. Actually, this year we have certain areas where we had some complaints in middle of January, just because when the flows are low, the stuff turns septic. And that's what happens. And just commenting on the increased complaints that you're referring to last year and whatnot, we did have an issue at the treatment plant at the time. That's what people were smelling on the road. So we have actually upgraded those fans and what have you. We're hoping for a better summer this year on Main Road.
Good, thank you very much. I forgot about the option of the potential tour. I do think that that's good news and that's great information to get out, that we have made those kinds of big changes. So maybe I can offline, I can work with you maybe on a piece that we can look at educating locally, maybe some virtual meetings and stuff, but we'll talk about that after. I'll follow up with you, Shashil. I appreciate it. Thank you for your indulgent commission.
Colleen, you had a question?
Sushil, can you just walk me through the two levels of service? Kind of my assumption was that it's a category A the first time you receive the complaint, and then it's a category B if you've had subsequent, because in theory you've already investigated it as an A, but am I on the right path?
Yes. So in the category B is the one that we actually immediately go out and investigate and see what has to be done and whatnot. And in the second one, what we do is, if it's from a manhole or a catch basin or whatever, we're actually will communicate with the customer and say, this is what's happening, we'll schedule it, it'll be looked after in a week or less or two. depending on what the activity is. And sometimes that does take a little bit of a longer time depending on what the investigation finds.
So the level of service actually refers to potential resolution, not the response to the odor call.
Well, it is a response to the category A is a response to the odor call. And what they will do actually is when they go respond to that odor call, they have some tools in their toolbox. For example, can they put a carbon insert in there right away? Can they put a deodorant block in there right away? And then the longer term solution, for example, they'll go video the line and see, okay, or zoom camera the line and say, yeah, it's blocked, it's got issues, it's getting stagnant, and then they'll schedule it and take care of that within a week or two. Generally, it's a lot faster than a week or two, but we just want to manage some public expectations around that, depending on what's going on elsewhere in the system as well.
Okay.
You're muted, Craig.
Thank you, Heidi. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Abstentions? Motion carried. That's it for the agenda. Thank you, Sheil. That's it for the agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Go, Kathy.
Just two other items I want to draw your attention to. One is there is a report in your package on the wastewater research program with Dalhousie University. That was actually a strategic objective approved by the board this year for us to deliver a report back on the progress with that wastewater research program. So I'm just pointing it out so that it's on the public record that we did complete that and you're aware of it. The second thing I want to do is briefly ask Jeff McCauley to turn on his camera and say hello. I want to introduce him to the board. He is our new Enterprise Risk Management Program Manager. He just started on February 10th.
Hey everyone.
Welcome.
Congratulations.
The board
Yeah,
will get
thanks.
to interact Jeff and meet with him at our board workshop in May and also our first Enterprise Risk Management Board Committee meeting in June.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Welcome aboard, Jeff. Congratulations.
Thanks, Craig.
Is that it, Kathy?
That is it.
Awesome.
Sorry, it's Commissioner Lovelace here, and I can't turn on my camera because if I do, I'm going to lose you. I'm going to lose connection. It's very unstable here for some reason. But I just wanted to say thank you to Colleen for being our vice chair and taking on that role, and congrats to Commissioner Kent. But I do have to head out to another meeting, so I'm going to duck out. But thanks so much for a great meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think we're at the tail end of the agenda anyway, ladies and gentlemen. So can I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
So moved, seconded. We stand adjourned.
All right. Take care, everyone.